RevOpsAF, the only podcast for people who are RevOpsAF and want to learn all about things that are RevOps AF.
Our goal is to give the revenue operations community, that includes marketing, sales, and CS, for any of you not paying attention, the skills needed to accelerate their careers.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the RevOps AF podcast, where we talk to people who are RevOps AF about things that are RevOps AF. And today I'm with Melanie Fellay, who is the CEO and co-founder of Spekit. Spekit is an AI-driven enablement platform, and we are going to be chatting about all things enablement, revenue enablement, sales enablement, all of the enablement and learning things. But Melanie, I guess first I'll let you add anything to that personal and professional introduction. And I do have actually one question, non-RevOps related question. I like to either start or end with it. So today I'm going to start with it, is just tell us, obviously add anything to the professional introduction that you want, but tell us like one non-RevOps, non-CEO, non-enablement thing about you, like that you're passionate about, like outside of company building, outside of enablement, outside of work, like what's one thing that Melanie is passionate about?
Oh, good question. I'd say I moved back to the Bahamas 2 years ago. And the reason for doing that was more so for personal reasons that I actually think it's helped with me professionally too. But I've always felt more connected to my vision of myself here. So I like to do a lot of, mindfulness related activities, whether that's reflecting, journaling, doing like vision exercises, goal setting. So I say that's an area that I invest in quite a bit just to keep me, I get a post, but I also love all things. My mom's an artist, so I love all things design. Like I'm in the process of building a house, and I've actually taken the 2D architectural, whatever designs and built a whole 3D model with all the interior designs. I'm planning a wedding and I'm doing like all of the event planning pretty much myself in terms of design. So I love all things interior design, event design. I almost went into event design full time. So that's probably that.
That's awesome. I love that. Tell us more. So we talked about enablement as like the topic for discussion today. So actually, one of the questions I want to ask you first is obviously CEO, co-founder of this company. I believe first-time founder. Is this the your first-time founder?
Yeah, first-time founder. Yeah.
So I guess bring us back to the origin of starting this thing. I know I'm now my second business, and I can think back to my first startup. And I can remember like the first time when like I said the idea out loud and someone was like, oh, that doesn't sound so crazy. And I can tell you like what I said, who that person was, right? So bring us back to that time, like how this whole idea for an enablement product company get started.
I actually love that question because I think it's super relevant to this audience, RevOps. So I actually don't have a background in enablement or learning design or training at all. I actually went and studied finance and accounting undergrad. I got my Series 7, which is a financial license that allows me to sell instruments. I worked at a real estate finance tech company, and that's actually where the idea for Spekit was born. But after working on the client-facing side and deal side, it was real estate underwriting. I ended up basically falling into my role of BizOps. So I was actually managing BizOps at my last company, where it started off with everything from pulling all of our data and reporting together to pretty quickly owning our entire employee-facing technology stack, which was born because, or that I inherited it because we'd spent a buttload of money on implementing Salesforce. And most of our employees came from like very traditional, like real estate backgrounds. And so Salesforce was a new concept to them. They were very much used to operating out of spreadsheets and Outlook. And it had just been a complete, utter failure. Like no one was adopting it. Everyone had their own definitions of what our fields were and stages were. And it was just a giant mess. And so long story short, I ended up taking over Salesforce and actually like being our product owner. I got really deep in Salesforce, full blown admin, and became obsessed. And I've always loved math, physics, logic. So I absolutely loved it. Ended up integrating it to Yesware and buying a couple other tools. And so I got really deep on that RevOps side. And I actually remember there was a specific meeting, I'd say, where I was just like, oh my God, this is just driving me crazy. I got to do something about it. And it was right before a really critical board meeting. The company wasn't doing very well. We'd missed our revenue targets, and I'd pulled all the data for the board meeting, which if you're in RevOps, you can probably relate to having all of that. And we were sitting in the room, and the CEO started questioning some of the data. And pretty quickly, it was clear that the three different sales leaders we had in the room all were operating off of like completely different definitions of what our stages were, how we were entering amounts, how we were logging our deals. And I just remember sitting there being like, I've got to document. I've documented all this. I've communicated to the teams, and just no one was following it. And I was like, I just wish there was something literally in people's faces while they were working that told them what they needed to do. And everyone had their own definitions around our metrics. And still now, like MQL, SQL, like you talk to two marketers in the same company and you have different definitions. And I was like, I just wish there's a single place where I could document all of our fields, all of our processes, all of our internal knowledge, and surface it to our reps, surface it to our leaders, surface it to everyone exactly where they needed it, whether they were in Tableau, which was the joy that we used to use at the time to pull our reporting, or whether that was in Salesforce, wherever it was. And so I just started looking online, Google, Salesforce training, internal knowledge. And pretty quickly I went down this like rabbit hole of looking at like every LMS I could find, every CMS I could find, every digital adoption platform I could find, every knowledge management solution. And I was like, hold on, this is insane. You're telling me that all of these platforms have this like foundation of content, whether it's knowledge, files, you name it. And they have search, they have folders, like they have 60% of the same capabilities, but then each category of software had a couple features that were different. And I was like, it's also, they were disconnected from our systems, which meant that if I made a change in Salesforce, I was going to have to remember, someone else was going to have to remember to go update this content. And I'm like, that's insane too. I wish our knowledge was actually connected to the underlying data model. That way, as our Salesforce was built out, as we added competitors to our pick list, as we added fields, objects, our knowledge would scale. And so I started spending a lot of time really diving in, getting clear on what capabilities I liked and what I didn't, and found that of those categories, I kind of did a giant map. There was like 60% of the same stuff, right? Search, folders, whatever. 20%, which were, I would say, unique and valuable. So like in an LMS, you could assign and assess. I was like, okay, that's cool. In a CMS, you could like share and track. But then there was a bunch of other features, like the other 30% or 20% that were just like, okay, stuff that I was like, none of us are ever going to use. And I was like, I just wish I could build a single platform that combined these different features that I liked, but delivered it where people wanted. And oh, by the way, that was actually integrated to Salesforce in our data model so that as we built out our data model, which was a reflection of our business, our knowledge would scale almost like a data dictionary as a foundation to our knowledge base. And I started designing it. I got Sketch. I told you I like designing. I got Sketch. I started like playing around and I shared it with just a couple of people. And pretty quickly, I got some really interesting responses. I'm like, oh, interesting. And I called it Spekit is because when I was managing Salesforce, we used Jira to manage all of our product development. I was on the product team for a short period of time. Whenever someone wanted a change or something built out, I'd be like, oh, go write a spec, go write a specification doc. And so the whole idea was like the best time to document your processes are when people are basically writing down the requirements of it. So that's kind of like the idea behind it.
That's awesome. I love that. And I too share a similar background I call myself a recovering accountant. Finance and accounting was early on in my career. And then BizOps was my first kind of foray into being given all the RevOps stuff. And then from there went out and started a company. So I love that. So obviously enablement, learning, things like that, very near and dear to your heart, and obviously things you're an expert in. So before we dive into some specifics on that, let's just start with the definition. So as we talk about enablement, let's set the stage. What does that mean? Like, how do you define enablement as we're speaking about it today?
Great question. I think I've gone back and forth with exactly like what words people are used to using that I include. But the first thing I'll say is I like to think of the word or like the verb more, which is like to enable. Like, what does a rep need to be enabled? And I think about it really in the moment. And I think that's the biggest difference in how we've optimized building the platform versus kind of more traditional platforms is I've always really focused on like, how do we enable people in their moment of need? And it really comes back to this idea that at the end of the day, we're all busy humans. Like everyone's busy. Everyone's got a million things on their mind, whether it's personal, professional, product development's changing constantly. There's just so much information, so much noise, so much that we expect of people that even with the best intentions, expecting them to know everything, remember everything, know where to find everything, it's just, I think, setting yourself up for failure as an enablement team or as a company, as well as the reps. And I've always thought about what do reps need to feel enabled in the moment? right? And so I like to think about it really from a jobs to be done perspective, right? Okay, if I'm preparing for a meeting, what kind of enablement do I need? If I am following up after a meeting, what kind of enablement do I need? And so I think of it as a combination of both like content, right? What kind of content do I need to potentially share with my buyer or sales collateral that I need to use in my sales deck, sales process? I think about what workflows or process knowledge do I need to know? Like if I wrap up a call and they ask for a quote, I want our reps to have zero friction between going and getting that quote done and sent over as quickly as possible. So how do we enable them to get from getting off that call to hitting send on that quote as quickly as possible? So I think of it in terms of kind of enablement. And I also think about it in terms of knowledge, right? Like how do we make sure that they have the knowledge and skills that they need to be able to handle that? Meaning if a competitor was mentioned on a call that rep hasn't heard of before, how do we make sure that it's as easy as technologically possible for them to get up to speed on who that competitor is and how we position against them? So I really think about it in terms of like knowledge, content, and like workflow enablement primarily. I would say kind of like skills and coaching falls into that as well. I'd say there are probably other platforms that I think are stronger on the true like pitch practice skills development side. I think, frankly, I see that more of a manager role. I think there's only so much rep can really learn from recording a pitch in an LMS. Like, I think to me, that's really the role of the manager to like work on the soft skills. So I've really focused on like the other elements of enablement.
Yeah, makes sense. I like just that small shift in that you mentioned in terms of how to think of it is not enablement, but how do you enable, right? Allow them to take action. And if you look at it that way, it spans a lot of different things, a lot of different elements of the job. It's not just, like you said, training, it's knowledge, it's workflows, it's systems, it's a lot of stuff. So I guess we talked a little bit about this before we started recording, the shift from like sales operations to like revenue operations and people looking at things across the revenue engine. And I think historically, at least on the enablement side, a lot of folks have viewed enablement or how you enable reps, account executives, people on the sales team. But go-to-market motions now are more complicated. There's product-led, there's sales-led, there's expansions, there's renewals, right? Like you now have to enable a lot of different people across the revenue engine. And so what have, I guess, you seen, or how have you seen this shift from sales enablement to broader revenue enablement? What does that exactly mean? How does enablement expand outside of the traditional way that we've seen it on the sales side specifically?
Yeah. I'd add one more kind of vector into that, which is like the role of L&D in all of this, right? Because for sales enablement, revenue enablement, those roles in themselves are still relatively new of the last 10, 15 years. And still, there's a lot of customers we work with where like that title is not a known title, right? There's sales training, there's other roles, but that's not a thing. So like to me, the role of L&D is really at the company level, making sure that employees really understand the company's vision, mission, any sort of like HR, security, training, ideally high-level products and services, company value, et cetera. I think when it comes to the role of sales enablement versus revenue enablement, I think it only makes sense that you've got someone that's thinking of the strategy across the board. Because if you look at like most, at least in SaaS, most companies, they're CSMs and their account managers, they're sellers too, right? And so this idea that, hey, we're going to enable our sales team differently than our CS team, when a lot of the fundamental content around your products and services is going to be the same, is, I think, unrealistic. Now, what I think is really important is if you take a jobs to be done mentality to how you think through your enablement programs in terms of the day in the life of a rep, right? The day of the life in the CSM. I think what complicated things and why you started getting all this bifurcation is instead of our entire go-to-market team using Salesforce, we're now going to have these tools over here for our sales team and these tools over here for our CS team. And so now you've got all these additional enablement needs and all these different workflows. And so I think we like overcomplicated things in the last decade, where now you have this absolute necessity of having all these different functions created. Now, even if you have revenue enablement across the board, like I still do think like having someone that's more focused or dedicated to the different parts of your revenue org is important. What an SDR needs versus an SC versus a sales rep versus CS, like you're going to have different needs. You're going to need to tailor that to each person for it to feel relevant. Otherwise, they're just not going to attend. They're going to feel checked out. But that's actually where I think technology can be used, right? My view is that if you have underlying case studies, whether it's a CSM or a rep, they're both going to need to be able to share that with the customer, whether it's an existing customer saying, hey, I'd love to see how other companies have rolled, or whether it's a new deal. The question is, at what point that's needed is going to be different. So how do you leverage technology to understand that context and surface it to them? But I do think that companies that have those roles completely bifurcated is a challenge.
Yeah.
The one exception I'll say to that is like true call centers. Like we have a lot of customers who are in like more of the call center support use case. And I will say their needs at least tend to be slightly different than more of the go-to-market, like sales side.
Yeah, I can see why that would be. But yeah, like you said, at the end of the day, if you have an SDR, an account executive who's trying to close a deal, you need to enable them to do that. If you have a CSM, and then they're trying to sell the renewal, but they're doing it in a very different way, which is making sure those folks are successful with the product and that their questions are getting answered and that they're getting the resources and things they need to be successful. But at the end of the deal, they want that customer to stick around to renew, right? And they're going to need some of the same things that account executive would need, but the context might be different or the reason might be different.
And on that note, taking a customer-centric view, what you don't want is that your sales reps are selling one way, your CSMs then get the deal and are using different language or saying different things or talking about a different way that they're measuring ROI than what you were sold in the sales process. I think at the end of the day, like that's your customer experience just suffers. And so I think it did for many years. Like we even got way too siloed, even within this RCS team at one point in terms of how many handoffs we had for the customer. And we got feedback that this was a bad experience. And so we course corrected. And now we've really tried to create as much consistency as possible between when someone comes in the door to hopefully when they eventually expand. And I think a lot of companies have felt that and now gone back to, okay, we need to make sure that we're thinking through this holistically and not as the point problems in time where like our reps are struggling with this or CSMs are struggling with this. They might be two completely different things, but how do you make sure that you're taking a holistic view at how that's going to get enabled on across the team?
Yeah. Yeah. So you have obviously a lot of different customers, folks like Zoom, Southwest, Uber, right? Like tons of different customers that use your product. You've seen probably different versions of enablement, good enablement, bad enablement at a variety of different organizations. So maybe we'll start with the good. Like what are some of the companies that do this the right way within their, whether it's like RevOps or L&D teams, wherever it is? What does it look like? What are the common threads that some of these companies who are really strong and do it right, what do they do?
If you don't mind, I'm actually going to start with where people do it wrong because I've got more examples of that, unfortunately.
Let's do that. Yeah, let's start with where people, let's start the opposite end and then we'll work our way to the positives.
Yeah. So when I think about customers who have churned on us and they're like, it wasn't you, it was us. And I think it was probably a combination of both, to be fair. In some cases, it's often when they were buying a technology to solve a problem they felt and had, but they weren't willing to invest in the people and process first. Like a few of our customers that have churned over the years were like, we just weren't ready for Spekit. And I'm like, well, it's not, we're just delivering your information. They're like, that's the problem. We don't have processes yet. We don't have documentation yet. And so now you bought a solution that doesn't do that. So I'd say a lot of companies are weaker on the process side than my RevOps heart wanted to really appreciate. And I think when it comes to investing in any sort of enablement platform, like you need to have an owner, like someone that's dedicated. Like we can focus on making it as easy as possible to create content and do all that stuff, but you still need someone that's like dedicated to thinking through enablement. When we've seen small customers churn, like they feel the pain of enablement, but their teams didn't want to invest in the individual roles. Or there's a lack of clarity between like what content does PMM own versus RevOps versus enablement, and those teams not talking to each other as well as they should. So I'd say it often comes down to lack of like people and process. I'd say the most shocking answers when I ask most companies, like, what is your approach to change management? Like, how do you communicate changes? How do you keep your answers up to date? You'll get 3 different answers on the call, and almost all of these companies are like, we don't really have that figured out yet. And that's a very big example, which is if you don't have a consistent approach to how you enable your people on change, which is, I believe, the most important thing in this environment, with how fast your products and services and competitive environment and everything else is changing around you. If you don't have consistency in the channels you're using and the mechanisms you're using, and everything feels, oh, we're going to do a training for this and we're going to do this for this, and you don't have that level of repeatability, you're really going to struggle. So I'd say companies that haven't taken the time to really take a operations approach to building their enablement program, I think have really struggled. I'd say the other piece is whenever I ask an enablement person, like, when's the last time you sat with one of your reps and watched them work? The answer is almost always no. I think a lot of enablement and RevOps people build the solutions they think are important, but they don't have that true product manager role of doing discovery. Like at my last company, the reason I think I was relatively successful in my roles, I would sit in the pit with our dealer guys and be like, walk me through how you do your thing. Walk me through how you do your process today, and like really deeply understanding that to build that out. And so I think a lot of teams create a lot of training and they put on these webinars and stuff, but they don't really understand how that's getting received by the teams or absorbed. And like their answer is, let me do another survey, rather than let me just spend the time talking to each rep or like watching them work if you're in person. So I'd say those are some of the basic fundamentals I notice, like when there's a disconnect or when like companies are struggling with content adoption or whatnot, is that there's just a disconnect between what your reps actually need and the value that you think you're delivering. Another one is when enablement thinks they're responsible for all things. I think there was this weird, I'm glad that it's reversing, but for a while, it almost became like enablement's responsible for coaching. And I personally don't believe that. Your managers are responsible for coaching. Like your managers should be expected to listen to calls and to listen for certain things and to coach and to do that. Enablement's role is not to coach. Enablement's role should be to identify what are the patterns across the board where there are gaps and how do we close those gaps with skills training or with content or whatever it is. But I think that when the role of enablement within the organization isn't clear and there's like a lack of accountability between like what is the role of the manager versus the role of enablement versus role of sales leadership, I think that's tough. And few actually know what they're trying to measure. Like when I ask them, like truly when I ask them, hey, what's your ramp time? Or like, how are you measuring ramp time? How are you focusing on those things? Like a lot of those answers are pretty ambiguous. If you don't know what you're trying to solve for and you don't know how to measure it, because they're like, what's going to be the ROI of Spekit? I'm like, talk to me, like what's your sales productivity? And I ask that because it's such a vanity metric that like every enablement, every solution asks out there, they're like, do you mean by that? I'm like, how would you measure sales productivity? And most of them haven't actually spent time looking to see like how much time their teams are wasted. Like very few have done time studies. And so I think it's tough because they're buying all these tools under the promise of ROI, but they actually haven't taken the time to really understand what their benchmark, what their baseline is and what they're trying to improve on. And I'm exaggerating here in some respects, but I think it's been a challenge for a lot of enablement teams to figure that out. So I'd say that, and then they bought the 4 tools. I bought an LMS, a CMS, a knowledge base, and a DAP, and I'm hoping that I can implement them all at once and have content in 4 different places and hope that they're all wildly successful. That tends to be a huge pain point too. I think the companies that are really successful, they tend to have like C-level executive alignment. Like the CRO is involved in deals, like the CRO is bought into the value of enablement. They understand what enablement looks like. They have a clear understanding of what they're going to expect their managers to do. They're going to reinforce and they expect their managers to reinforce the enablement and hold their teams accountable to it. I'd say that's probably single-handedly the thing that matters most. I'd say other teams that I've seen be really successful is they have really engaged users, whether it's like a champions group or something, but like whenever we're like, hey, we want to test this new functionality, they're like, okay, great. Here are 5 reps that want to try it. Like they've got a team of users that are like wanting to see that engagement. I think that's because their reps ultimately respect how these technologies or training are receiving that. So I'd say those are a couple of the small things.
Yeah, makes sense. I think this probably applies to tools outside of enablement as well, but I think far too often people think that their problems can be solved with a piece of technology, and the technology can only enable you to amplify and do things you already have in place. So like you said, if you don't have the people or process in place to do enablement the right way, no tool is going to magically make you successful in doing that. And I think the other piece that you mentioned, the champion piece, very important. Find those people on the team that can be those early adopters, right? They exist, I promise. You just got to go out and find them. And then I agree with you on the coaching versus enablement as well. I think it's the job of enablement to make sure that the sales managers have the resources to coach their team successfully. But they're not the sales manager, right? Like they're not the ones who are managing the team of account executives, SDRs, whoever it might be, right? It's not their job to do the coaching. It's just their job to set up the managers to do the coaching and have the resources that they need. And I love the I know I've been asked that question on current company, past companies of, oh, what's the ROI of something? And yeah, it's always, I think people always just expect you to be like, oh, 25x because this is the math, right? And it's like, no, I always ask the question of how do you define return? What does that mean? Is that like incremental dollars of revenue? Is it time saved? Is it something else? What are those things that matter to you? And like often people don't have a really good or clear answer. So yeah, understand with anything, understand where you're trying to move the needle, right? What are those outcomes that you're looking to drive? What are your goals? What are your KPIs? Is it sales productivity? Is it something else? And then that's how you're measuring, right, return. And then, yeah, make sure you got the people and process in place. Because again, no tool is going to magically make you successful with enablement.
That's actually why I love selling to call centers. They stumbled into it via expansion, and some of our customers, like Southwest Airlines, was a good example where we have a very large call center there that uses Spekit every day, and they are so metrics driven. Like they have every single metric down to a T, right? Because when you got thousands of agents taking in thousands of calls every day, you need to have your average handling time, your response time, your case resolution time, your number of times until something gets resolved. Like all those metrics are so granularly defined and measured. And it's actually really easy to then be able to compare like, hey, what content was accessed when and how does that actually have an impact? And on ramp times as well, just because the ramp time tends to be accelerated. So we've been able to very clearly do business cases there that are like rock solid. On the sales side, admittedly, it's just been more challenging other than qualitative, anecdotal feedback from teams, which is like, well, we're getting way more adoption than we used to, right? It's like, how does that translate to revenue? And that's something that I'm really excited to address from a product standpoint. But.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. I do have one last, I know I asked you a non-RevOps kind of question at the beginning. I got one more because you mentioned you're planning your wedding. Is that right? So when is, I guess maybe this is a series of questions packed into one. So when's the wedding day? About how many people are you gonna have? And then anything unique, special, crazy, odd that you're doing with the wedding?
Oh, good questions. It's next April. I promise. I've lived in a few places around the world, so I'd say it's going to be a very eclectic mix of close friends and family from my time in Switzerland and the States. So that'll be really fun. I'd say at this point, I'm probably getting married like physically on the beach, so barefoot, which I'm really excited about for a big group of people. And the welcome party is like an old school reggae party. So we're going to be getting down to that. So I'd say that's probably what's a little unique and different. Oh, and my fiance started a coconut branding company. So we're going to have branded coconuts at the wedding.
That's awesome.
So,
there you go. I love it. Yeah. Everything from bare feet on the beach to global citizens from all over the
globe. For someone that sees me in suits 24/7, it's like the other side of me. Side.
I love it. With the branded coconuts. So that's great. Melanie, thank you very much for dropping some enablement knowledge on us today. It was great chatting and great speaking, so I appreciate it.
You too. Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks so much for tuning in to today's episode, everybody.
For more great content like this, join our community at RevOpsCoop.com and check out the links provided in the show notes.
Keep it RevOpsAF, y'all.